Everything we had passed on the way was covered in her own shit. She had attempted to detox herself cold turkey, and at some point, decided to smear her shit all over her apartment and herself. She was obviously in need of medical treatment,
after an
and at
anomaly
that
was
point,
registered
she had
during
to
the
go to
test.
the
Like,
hospital
hear very
for a
loudly.
mandatory mental health evaluation.
Anomaly?
We offered her to go with the ambulance first, and she
me.
What? Why are you yelling at me here?
No, sir.
and again
All
she
modules were confirmed
The
fully
ambulance crew
operational.
tried to sweet talk her into
Far more
going,
likely,
but she started to
given the
become physically
circumstances, that the
confrontational with
sensors
everyone.
were overloaded.
My partner and I had to wrestle her to the ground to
What are
get her
they
into
saying?
handcuffs. We got her into the ambulance, and
They're
my
saying
partner
that
proceeded
the
to
machine
throw up,
broke.
and a state trooper had to help rip my uniform off of me
Is
before I
that
did the
so?
same, as we were now both covered in her
All the
shit.
sensors in section
go.
E are
Not so weird, but related story a relative told me. A woman came in with excruciating abdominal pain. This is in a small town, and I mean small, so the hospital has no theater/surgery, just a basic ER style setup. They do a scan and discover the woman was
Yes.
pregnant, but the pregnancy
Yes.
was ectopic and had burst in her fallopian tube. She was bleeding out
Everything is
internally,
fine,
and there
sir.
was almost nothing they could
Better
do,
even.
other than give her
There's
blood
been a
transfusions
development.
until such a time as the emergency helicopter from the nearest city hospital
Yes.
could get her and take her to
Understood,
their hospital
sir.
for treatment. The only problem was, she was a Mormon. No, she wasn't. She was a Jehovah's Witness. Sorry, and couldn't take a blood transfusion.
We know
Or
exactly
wouldn't,
where
if
they
you
were
prefer.
headed. If
So,
the armor is
team,
intact,
at a loss of
then
what
you
else they
best
can do,
determine the nature of
brainstorms
this
for a method
anomaly
to keep
soon.
this woman alive for the next hour, maybe longer, until she can get the surgery she needs. They ended up essentially sticking a tube into
What are
her
you making?
abdomen at the bleed site, putting a
Should
needle
you
in her
fail
arm,
to do so,
and connecting the tube so the
Oh.
blood she was
You will
losing
deal
was
with
being
our
pumped straight back
intruders
into her bloodstream.
personally.
She survived, but the baby was indeed lost.
Yes, sir.
I'm a firefighter paramedic, and I
Don't
work in an
worry.
area that has
I
some
treat
low-income
my
housing.
people more than
We got a
fair.
call one night at about 3 a.m.
So
for a
don't
woman having
disappoint
difficulty
me.
breathing. We arrived at the apartment complex, which could double for the buildings in the opening of the old show Good Times, and head up to the 7th floor. When we get to the apartment, we can hear this cackling laughter coming from inside. We identified ourselves, and the woman told us to come in. Now many residents
The
of these
passages
apartments are
beyond
really
these shipping
poor,
containers.
and they have few items
Let's
of
slip
furniture,
through 'em.
sometimes just a mattress on the floor of a 2-bedroom apartment, and that's it.
Talk
So we
about
open the
a
door,
tight
and of course,
squeeze.
the apartment has no lights at all,
You
but the
okay?
light from the hallway makes the living area easy to see.
Yeah.
In the middle of the living area is a 300-pound woman sitting on a giant shoe-shaped
So,
chair, like a high-heel
bumped
shoe
into
with
any
leopard
giant
print.
robots?
Nothing else visible in the room, and the woman is just laughing. We ask what's going on, and the laughing woman states she can't breathe at all and hasn't taken a breath all day. Mind you, we can see her breathing and laughing. She is able to speak to us. So my partner pulls out a flashlight, and we go to assess the woman. I start my exam, taking vitals while my partner holds the light. He heard something off to our side in an unlit part of the room and panned at the light over and let out a shit. In the unlit corner of the room was another very large woman lying on a single mattress on the floor, eating what looked like roast beef out of a bowl with her bare hands. The mattress woman says to us, "That bitch be lying, she high as fuck." 10 seconds after she says this to us, a door in the unlit apartment opens, and a man screams, "I told you to shut the fuck up." And the unseen door slams shut. While all this is going on, the woman on the shoe chair is just laughing uncontrollably. My partner and I both wanted to get the hell out of there ASAP. The laughing woman was breathing fine, and her vitals were good, and she stated she didn't call us anyway. We grab our bag and monitor and make a beeline for the exit. We pass the kitchen, and my partner shined the light in there as we pass. At the sink was a kid, looked to be about 12, washing dishes in the complete darkness of the apartment. We made the hallway shut the door after us and got back to our truck in record time. We called Child Protective the next day for a check safety for the kid. To this day, I think I walked into a Twilight Zone episode.
Like that in Reactor 1?
Yeah. Except the bastard looked like a scorpion. Speaking of which, what would you say that last one looked like?
Huh?
Crap.
Looks dead now.
Warning, may contain disturbing content. Viewer discretion advised. Truck drivers, what's a creepy story you've got from the middle of nowhere? Don't forget to like, subscribe and comment your own stories. Once I was driving through the Canadian Rockies late at night and had just passed through a small town.
All aboard.
So I'm driving through the pitch black, and I need to stop to pee and have a smoke. But because it's so dark, I missed the last rest stop for the next while. No problem, the highway is completely deserted. So I pull to the side of the road, have my pee while staring out into the dark and then light up a cigarette and stand by my car. As I'm standing there, I see the figure of a man just
so
walking
you
out of
know,
the tree line.
It's not gonna get any
I'm miles
easier.
from civilization, patchy cell service, and there isn't a soul on the road. I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, and maybe it was a deer, but nope, this was a man. So I calmly walk back to the driver's door and get in, locking the doors behind me. I'm keeping my eye on this guy as I nervously smoke and have my car in drive, ready to peel out, but for some reason, I just stayed put. The guy walks right up to my passenger door and knocks on the window. I crack the window,
Through here
and I
straight
ask
on
what's
to
up.
Reactor 5.
He replies to me in a very serious tone. I need you to call the cops. I
Only 'cause
cautiously
it
ask
is.
why, and he tells me he
That
had gone
there's
out
the
into the
reactor
woods to
support
kill
pillar.
himself, but he couldn't go through with it because he had thought of his daughter's
what's the
right
plan?
before he was about to do it. I call the cops
After
while the
plan
guy
E
quietly
comes
cries
F,
outside.
G,
He had a
then
kitchen
H.
knife that he was going to use on himself,
Thought
so
he
I
was
stayed
the
in the
last.
car and advised him to maybe leave the knife
This
on
here
the
is
ground
section
before the
F.
cops arrived.
We cut
The
through
cops
section
came and
G
got him,
and head for
but
H.
before they left with
A
him,
cargo
I
platform
gave him
in
a
H will
solid
get us
heart to
closer
heart
to the
and wished him
reactor.
well. I still think about
Biggs
him.
should be
I
somewhere
hope he
over
was
there.
able to turn things around. I used
Looks
to
like
work
the
as a
sun's
road
going
train
down on
driver in the
Midgar.
Gascoyne region of outback Western Australia.
Right. Double
A
time.
lot of black dog phenomena on night
We
shift.
got a date
I
with
would
the
see all
reactor.
kinds of things appear in the shadows because of fatigue, or three goats would change into some sort of beast. One time I swear I nearly ran over a corgi, which would be astronomical odds. There is one in the wild in this part of the outback. One night I pulled up to sleep, let the engine run cold for 10 minutes, then tried to sleep. I woke up to noises, not voices but some sort of
Just
order
don't
to the
look down,
noises,
okay?
and the whole cab
Easy
of the
for
truck
you
was
to say.
shaking. I looked in the mirror and saw shadows around the vehicle. I turned the truck on and every single light attached to the thing and hastily continued my run to the port.
Section G's through
This
here,
is
huh?
a big cab, would have taken a lot to move it. I rationalize it as it being windy, some goats around the truck and fatigue.
Hey,
Either way scared the
you
fuck
see
out of
something
me,
over there?
and I never slept on the night shift again. Well, it was creepy at first. I pull
Maybe the
into a
gate
Purdue
didn't
plant,
budge because there's
drop
not
my
enough
empty
power to
trailer and
spare.
go park where they
Gotta
allow
figure
bobtails
this
to
out.
sit, right next to a nice little pond. My pickup was in 12 hours, so I do my PTI and lay down in the bunk. At about 3 a.m. I hear something tapping on my
Insufficient
passenger
power.
side door. I get up,
course.
look out the window,
Hey guys,
expecting
look
to
at
see
this.
someone, maybe a
Instructions for
driver
dealing with
asking
power
for a lumber
shortage.
check, but no
Kill the
one
lights.
there. Maybe
Free
I'm
power for the gate and other stuff.
I
so I
don't
go
think I
back
ever
to lay
Sun
down.
lamps.
As soon as
You
my
think
head hits
these are
the
the
pillow,
plate suns?
I hear the tapping again,
The closest
except
thing we
this
have to
time
the
it's on
real
my
thing.
driver's side.
Gotta put out a
The same
sun
thing as
just to open
before.
the gate,
I
huh?
jump up and look
But
out
if
my
we go
window,
through with it,
but nothing's
the
there.
grounders in Sector 4 will
Double lock
suffer.
my doors just in
Now,
case and open my side
sun's going
hatches
out
so I can
good
hear
when
what's
we
going
go
on
to the
outside.
That's
After about
true.
15 minutes, I hear a very light
Let's
splat
go.
splat splat going along the driver's side of the truck. I slowly get up, planning to look out my
You'd
window
think
at
they'd
the
be
exact
able to
moment
balance the
whoever
load
it is
by now.
knocking on my door.
Maybe.
And then I hear a
Maintenance
thud
guys
coming
are
from the roof of the cab.
What?
I stop,
Ah.
grab my tire thumper off its hook,
Ah.
and for whatever the hell is going on.
Don't like it.
Then a
It's gotta
motherfucking
be
goose falls off the top of the
Man,
truck and lands on
look
my
at the
hood.
size of it.
It
That a
stands up,
console I seen at
waddles
the top
back
of that
and forth
ladder.
and looks at me. As we make eye contact, the tapping at my door starts again.
Yes,
go.
please.
I say
Okay.
fuck it and throw open the driver's side door, and there's another damn goose waddling away with all the speed it can manage, honking like a 5-year-old who just found the horn on his new bike. The pond I parked next to had a ton of them just dicking around. Needless to say, it was hard to sleep that night because every couple of minutes, the damn goose would peck at my door or land on the cab and waddle
Okay,
around.
that's that.
Great job,
I
Cloud.
used to do deliveries.
Up to.
I used to have this regular that was out in the boondocks, 25 meters plus out of the way of civilization and smack dab in the middle of two large towns. I would drive this route maybe once a month, and would always pass at least one car driving towards me due to the sheer length of the drive. There was a small group of old houses on this route that were really broken down,
Next
and
stop,
I had never
Section
seen
G.
anyone around them
Yep.
in 6+
And
months
after
of
that,
driving the route.
Reactor 5.
Always assumed
Oh,
they were
bugs.
vacant because they didn't look livable.
Ken.
Well, I was driving out to this customer one fall afternoon.
Great. I'm
Had
sure
been
those
driving
things
for
will
a
welcome us just as
very
warmly as before.
long time without seeing a single car drive
Tell
towards
you
me.
what, the rock
Finally,
runs
drive
deep in this
past the
damn
abandoned
pizza.
houses, and there's one old lady in her front yard pushing an old manual grass cutter, but she stops in her tracks as I drive towards her. I took it as a sign I was speeding or something and slowed down. I take a quick glance at my rearview mirror after passing by, and she was staring straight at me. She dropped the grass cutter and turned
Finish him off.
What?
very odd and doesn't set off my slightest sense.
No.
Never saw her again or
All I have is,
on the ground by those houses in the 10 months
my
I
shaver.
Not the middle of nowhere, but a trash route in a pretty rural area.
Why are you
We
pushing me,
were at a stop
Madison?
loading
That's
trash
not
when a
nice.
pickup stopped behind us.
Well,
A
I'm
petite
sorry.
woman in scrubs that were covered in blood got
Madison,
out and
stop
asked for
pushing me,
directions to
please.
Lake Jack Nolan. She said there was a deer that had been hit by a truck, and she had
All
been
done.
sent to remove the remains.
Cocky
She
little
never said
bastard,
who
ain't
sent
you?
her, but she wasn't moving a deer anywhere at her size. We gave her directions and sent her on her way. We all said we wondered if she was going to dump a body or something. She was already covered in blood in a nice truck and
They
was
busted?
supposed to be on her way to
Powered
move
down,
roadkill
is my
but was
guess.
far too heavy for her
Lucky
to
us, am I
handle.
right?
Then we
One
went
less
back
thing
to
for
work.
us to worry about.
My father's told me this story maybe 1,000 times. My family, as well as a couple of uncles and my oldest cousin, went on a trip from Mexico City to Acapulco
Feeling the air
when I
that
was
we
barely
gotta
a year
breathe
old.
with this shit.
Back home in the middle of
Monsters
the
sure
night.
seem to like it.
The
What's
good
up
old
with
days
that?
when we could
It's
travel
like
at
in the
night.
tunnels.
The car
They get
broke
twisted
down,
by the
and
motto,
the police
but
car
it all
quickly came
goes
to our
back to
help.
shit.
There were 3 policemen in the car, and the chief offered to take my dad to the nearest gas station, where he could find a mechanic, and told the other 2 officers to stay with our car. My dad says they seem absolutely not pleased with the order until the chief told them, "Don't worry, there's a woman and 2 children." That seemed to calm the 2 officers. Driving to the gas station in the police car, my dad asked the chief what was all that about. The chief told him that there had been many accidents in that part of the road. That's why they were able to find our car so quickly.
You okay?
All of the accidents
Yeah.
involved young men traveling without
Ah,
female or
going
child
for that
company.
material, weren't you?
Those who had survived
close,
said that they crashed
and
because
yet
they
so
could see a
far.
very beautiful woman next to the road. But once they came close to her,
This path's no
she
good
turned out
now.
to be just a
I'm sure
rotting
there's
corpse
another way
staring
to
at
get
them.
there.
And they crashed because they were paralyzed
Nothing
by
we can do
fear.
but search.
And when we find it, we can
Trucker
finally
here.
snag that material.
I think the best creepy thing that ever happened to me as I was heading from Tucson, Arizona, up into Salt Lake City, Utah. Well, this was a few years ago, and the main highway had been taken out in a flash flood, was under construction, so I had to take a weird detour through the mountains in lower Utah. Well, it was getting late, and I was getting tired, so I pulled off onto the shoulder and went to sleep in my
Hey,
bunk.
let's take a moment to get our
Now,
bearings.
this was in the middle of nowhere. The closest town was like 40 miles away, so it is completely pitch black outside once I turn the
We're
lights
still
on.
in G, right?
Anyway, around
Yeah,
4
and to
a.m. I
reach
wake
Mako
up because I
Reactor
hear
5,
something
we need to
messing
go
with
through
my
Section
truck,
H.
like playing with the air and
Okay.
power cables between my cab and the trailer,
Unfortunately, I
which
didn't
is
spot a
literally 6
connecting
inches
catwalk
from
to
where my
Section
head is at
H.
but on the
Did you?
outside of the cab.
Well,
Then I feel
we
something
could always
climb onto
do
the
another
landing
lap.
that's on the back of
Go
my
for
truck,
10.
and
Well
it shakes
done.
my whole truck.
The
So
only
I'm
other
guessing
route that I
something
can
around
think
200
of
to
would be-
300 pounds was climbing around back there. I'm thinking like a mountain lion or a bear. At this point, I'm wide the F awake, and I
say
want to
something?
get this thing
Up
away
for
from
giving
me.
it a try?
So I slam
What? I
Don't
can't
work
hear what the
out.
kid's yelling.
trying to scare whatever is out there. Slam hard enough to really make it loud.
So we're
I then
shooting
hear
for those
someone,
giant
a
fans
man,
way over there.
scream bloody
Okay.
murder, and
At
I
least
hear
we've
them
got a
fall
clear
off the back of my
landmark to
truck.
guide us.
I then hear about 15
What am I
people
grabbing?
Ryan, stop
Those
it.
ventilation fans?
Biff?
climb up
Keeping the
front,
plates air
turn on
clean
my
by
lights
pushing
and
the smog
illuminate a
into the
squad of
smoke.
army reserves doing
Old
their
systems
midnight rough
designed
march
to
and
make
capture
shit roll
drills.
downhill
Turns out
fast.
these guys were supposed to go find an abandoned truck and secure it for their midnight drills.
I think we already
That
checked
truck
this
was
place
3
out.
miles back down the road. They were not expecting me to be sleeping there and thought I was part of the drill. I'm ex-military, so after explaining I was not part of their test and legit was just there out of coincidence, we laughed it off. They had to radio to their CO and tell him I was there and not have the other squad follow.
Got ourselves a real piece of work right here.
You don't know that happened. Need a breather. Need to heal
The
up.
moon was full and hot, and I passed around mistakenly being a figure in a nearby cutscene. A little spooky, but I just wrote it off as an old timer putting up a scarecrow for the grandkids. I thought I saw you. I put my lights off to
That's
that.
that.
Saw figures but nothing else. I couldn't be sure, but it looked like another was in a different spot. Maybe it was I was definitely feeling it. The highway was devoid of anyone passing every 10 minutes or so. I didn't want to, but I had to jump
You know
out to
the
pee.
best way to not get
I
lost is
considered
to
a bottle,
believe that
but I told myself I was
mind
being
over matter.
childish.
Isn't that
I
from one
took
of
a look at the
Marlene's?
city. and it was right where I figured it should be.
Loves
I
it
hop
when I
out,
read it to him
walk
before
between my
bedtime.
truck and trailer and
Doing
start
all the
leaking.
voices.
Life
Every
in the
fiber of
endless
my being
maze.
wanted to look.
Am I right?
I told myself again I was
I
being
remember.
foolish, but I couldn't help it. I looked out. The field was empty, the figure wasn't there. My stomach dropped, I pinched off and jumped back in. I took off down the highway, didn't give one shit about a violation. Stopped 40 minutes up the road at a well-lit and very full Love's. Haven't stopped on a ramp since. I used to deliver hotshot freight across the Great Plains/Minnesota area. One night around 2 a.m. I was hauling across North Dakota trying to reach Montana by morning. I was delivering a particularly valuable tractor part that a farm desperately needed for the following day. I began to notice some highway hypnosis sneaking up on me, but it didn't really bother me because I've been through it hundreds of times before. Anyone who has driven across North Dakota knows that it is incredibly flat. Like, really flat. There also
Here we go.
very straight and long road. It's somewhat easy to see things on the road that are narrow, even at night. I noticed something long on the road, spanning my entire length, approximately half a mile in front of us. I slowed down a little and prepared to move into the opposite lane, thinking it was
Motherfucker, fuck off!
As I got closer, I noticed it was two people, laying head to toe across the entire lane.
I got your number.
I swerved into the other lane, successfully avoided it, and came through almost completely.
No, don't overdo it.
But they didn't move,
I got it.
not an inch. I was just about to back up and check on them when I remembered a story that an old graybeard colleague of mine told me. He told me that in certain remote areas, people would lie down in the middle of the road and wait for a follow truck to stop and see what's going on. At that point, the little layers, along with whoever else is hiding in the nearby bushes, will beat the shit out of the driver and steal his vehicle, leaving him in the middle of
Would
nowhere.
say that.
I decided not to back up, and when the two people in the road saw me put my truck back in gear and drive away, they both got up and walked toward the shoulder. I called the police and explained what happened, but we were so far away from civilization that I doubt anything came of it. Thanks to that old graybeard, I got to keep my truck, my
Hey,
job,
look.
and my teeth.
I think we can climb onto that pipe.
Sure seems that
Not
way.
sure if this story is creepy, but it's definitely scary. My father was a truck driver in East Africa in the 80s and early 90s.
No fear.
During the years leading up to the Rwandan genocide, my father was passing through Rwanda. He reached a checkpoint and was forcibly removed from his truck at gunpoint. Apparently, he looked like he belonged to
Hey
the
guys,
Tutsi tribe,
you know,
and they
these
put him in a
fans
cage
are
with
really
other
loud.
Tutsi prisoners.
You chickening
He
out?
tried
Hell
communicating
no.
that he isn't Rwandan, but
I'm
no
just
one
worried
spoke the same
that your
language
bony
as
ass
him.
is gonna get blown off
Every
the
night
side
they
and
would
shit.
take about
Enough.
5 people
We
from
gotta
the
keep
cage and slaughter
moving.
them in front of him.
Okay then.
After the third night,
Follow me.
he saw a man that spoke a little bit of Swahili, which my dad spoke,
No
and
worse
told
than
him
a
that he's
windy
not
day,
Rwandan
huh?
and showed him his ID.
One with a tornado
Somehow
warning,
that guy
maybe.
got him out, and
Don't
he was
look at the
handed
fan.
keys to his
Whatever
truck
you
and was
do.
on his way.
Right.
I used to drive a truck in northern Manitoba. There's a road in the northeast you can drive for several hours and see very few vehicles. This road is quite flat and straight in stretches. Of course, this is deep in the bush. One day I saw something cross the road in the
Hey,
distance.
what's that behind
Very
the fan
large,
over there?
easily
Isn't
past
that-
the hood on my truck,
Hey,
but not
don't be a
long,
dumbass.
like a moose or a
Tifa told you not to look at the
Just
fan.
It disappeared into the bush, and as I drove by the spot, the hair on the back of my neck stood up. I heard days later a tow truck driver describing on the radio his encounter with a similar creature, only he was much more clear he had spotted Bigfoot.
Made it
This
through in
guy
one
went to
piece.
some length to explain he didn't want people thinking he
Think
was
that took
crazy,
a couple years off my
but he was
life.
sure what he saw.
I mean,
I asked an
not
Aboriginal
really.
client of
Couple
mine in a
seconds,
nearby
maybe.
community,
3 tops.
and he said the elders spoke of them as commonly the same way they spoke of the other animals. I don't know what I saw that day, but I'm certain it wasn't a bear, moose, deer, or
What?
elk. I just don't know what the hell it was. Driving through rural
Oh,
NL,
that's sweet.
beastie area with the crazy melted rock.
That's like super sugary Kool-Aid,
No plants
man.
or anything, just rock and sand. Monsoon time, raining
Section
cats
H
and dogs
is just up
pouring
ahead.
so hard you
Slow
could
and
barely
steady,
see
guys.
going 20 miles per
And
hour.
that's our objective?
Thunder and
The
lightning
cargo
just rocking the car.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure
Sometimes
that's the
turning
one.
into hail and pounding you. Just a nasty storm. Came around a corner, and the whole countryside legit on fire. Like 20 tall
This
flames,
is it.
hundreds of yards in all
Cargo
directions while
platform
pouring
Biggs
rain
was
at
talking
dusk.
about.
Just rocks
That's
and
Biggs
dirt
was
wildly
talking
on
about.
fire in the pouring rain. Just slowly drove on. It was totally freaky and surreal. Honestly though, I may have hallucinated it.
Insufficient
Check the
power.
news. A propane truck slid
You're
off the
kidding
road
me.
going way too fast
Needs
and
3
apparently
lights worth,
busted
looks
open
like.
pretty violently
But
and lit
that's-
on fire.
That's
Never saw
all
the
of
truck.
them,
It must have
isn't
been
it?
behind something. Felt a bit bad
All or
after about
nothing.
not stopping.
Let's regroup here if we get lost.
My friend drove
Remember
for a
the
few years a
H1
while
sign.
back. He told me
Right.
he was driving a rig very late at
Let's
night
see
in
now.
Utah,
Closest
driving
light
on a
ought to
lesser
be.
used 2-lane highway.
That one.
He said he remembers feeling very alert that night. So he noticed what appeared to be a figure
By the light of
manifesting
these
up ahead on the
magnificent
dark
lamps,
road.
we shall
Told
lead our
me it
brothers
wasn't
and
on the road,
sisters of
but
the
it was
Undercity
next
to
to
a
it.
brighter
He
future.
then
What,
comes to a
one is
stop
to
and
me?
grabs his
It's
heavy-duty
from a speech
flashlight
President
and points it at
Shinra
the
gave
figure.
talking up the importance of the sun
describes it.
lamps.
Apparently,
Brighter future
this humanoid
mind.
creature had a dead
Shinra's
coyote it
leading
was
us
eating,
down a
and
one-way
the truck
path
had
to
gotten its
darkness and
attention and
death.
pissed it off.
Which one tastes weirder?
So it sort of stands up so he can get a full view
That one
of the
tastes
thing.
better. Why?
It was
Which
blonde,
one
with
tastes
very big
weirder?
eyes, and of
I wanna
course,
guess why.
the coyote
You
blood all
gotta
over
add
its
something
face.
in it.
Its height was
I'll
about
show you what I
6'2". It had skinny limbs, no clothing. He then describes how it started to
You trying to
shuffle
kill me?
slowly towards the truck. Not only does he not have a weapon at that time, the only usable weapon being his flashlight, is actively helping him view this creature. He decides to book it and leave.
I added this.
Had no problem passing it.
Oh.
I
Turned
added
around
a
to see it
box.
standing in the middle of the road on 2 legs as he drove away.
Error.
When he reaches the nearest rest
Insufficient
stop,
power.
he sees
Gotta
2
power
other
down a
truckers
sun
stop.
lamp first.
Apparently, my friend wasn't the only one to see the thing. Both the 2 guys looked as horrified as he was. Okay, got one while I was actually driving a bus, made out of a truck, in the deserts of
You
Central
asked for
Australia.
it.
I was over 300 kilometers from the nearest town. So yeah, middle of nowhere stuff. So I was out on a 5-day charter to pick up a bunch of Aboriginal and other women to go and get their women's business health checks done. Have smears and non-containers.
You're done.
On the way, I took them to get that done. We went by a place called holding a service that was random in South Australia. We left from there quite late to make the 3 or so hour journey back to where we were all staying overnight. The next day I'd take them back to their respective desert communities.
Look,
The passengers
there's
all
the
fell
switch.
asleep as
Let's
they'd had a
flip it
very
and
long
go.
day, as had I, but that's my job. Even the nurse who was traveling with us fell asleep. So there's me, all alone in the cab of the Mercedes truck-derived bus, my 30 passengers all sleeping in the darkness of the passenger pod behind the cab, and it was around 9 p.m. Up ahead in the distance, I see a headlight coming towards me along the lonely desert dirt road, so I dip my lights, so the spotlights go off and adjust to see only what low beam will show me. I drive down into a slight
Rerouting
dip of a
power.
dry creek bed
Please
expecting
wait.
to see the car with only one headlight anytime shortly.
That's 1 down.
It's nothing unusual to see a
Only
car with
2 more
only one
lights to
headlight
go.
out there, so I'm not even remotely bothered. As I come out of the dip,
Reinitializing
I put my
intrusion prevention
spotlights and high beams back on, and there is no car, no nothing, just the empty dirt
Intrusion
road.
prevention?
There is no dust in the
online
air,
'cause of us.
and I can see a good distance in front of
No
me
need
and
to
out to
fret,
each
John.
side.
A few rusty
There was
mechs ain't
nothing
gonna
there,
keep us from
just
reaching
the
the
empty
This
end.
on hand when
The
you
dirt
make
road and me alone
so
in
you
the
don't have
cab.
to read this.
I keep the lights all on until we come to a
What?
stop about an hour later.
We're better.
So you
I
don't
didn't
have to
see
read
any
this.
cars
You
or
don't
anything
have
for
to
the rest of the journey.
That's
Before I let the passengers
Yeah,
go,
over.
I asked if
Over
anyone saw the
again.
car, and they all go back
That's what I
down.
deal with these
And after a
guys.
short
No, I'm not
they
doing
start
that.
talking in their own language. Kidjan Chakdara and Yangtani Chakdara.
Oh wow,
They all
that's
get
you.
off the bus. A few minutes
But
later,
where's his
a
son? I
couple
don't
of the
even
ladies
see
come up
it.
to me
Just
to
like
ask
that,
me to tell
okay?
them exactly
I
what I
gotcha.
saw
Just
without
like
leaving
that.
anything out and to describe
We can
exactly
move this
where I saw it.
catwalk.
Now I'm a big guy. I've
On
lived on
the
3
catwalk.
continents. I've been a
Yeah,
police officer,
lined it
a
up
teacher,
perfect.
bus and coach drive, truck driver, all sorts of things. Let's just say that I'm pretty skeptical, but I do have an open
Which
mind.
way to the next light?
I'm not
If we
scared by
can't make
much in
sense
this
of this
world.
place, we're gonna get
After I
lost.
told these
Well,
ladies
at least we
everything
know
from
where the
start to
big
finish
ass
and
things
described
are.
in minute detail exactly
Think
where
back.
it happened.
Anybody
I took
see a
note exactly
connecting
how
catwalk?
far out we were when it happened. The 2 ladies looked at me with the whites showing in their eyes. They looked spooked, and they said, and I'll never forget the way they said it. I got on great with the indigenous people of Central Australia, and I trust that I know when something rattles them. They said, this driver, we are so lucky that you did not stop, because if you did, no one would have seen any of us ever again. We'd all be gone. I asked why, and they just shook their heads and said not to talk about it because it had scared all the ladies. I'm sure many people have heard about the Min Men lights in Western Queensland. Well, whatever these ladies knew about whatever I saw in our location, they were convinced that it wasn't something you wanted to meet in the desert at night. I only ever saw this once. I only saw it for maybe a minute, and it just looked like a car headlight a couple of kilometers away up the road. But I'll tell you what, if the ladies that come from this area, and whose people have survived in this desolate, remote part of the continent for 60,000 years are worried to the point of all being scared, I certainly don't want to mess with whatever
Deal
it
with
is.
that.
About damn time! Time to die!
My dad drove a truck between Edinburgh and London and tells the story.
Bring it
He
home!
was driving down the motorway and looked to his right, saw a woman with a mistrustful lunge, as he describes it, staring at him with a terrified expression from the car next door. Before he
Got it.
Too late.
and my dad,
Let's
although shaken, carried
take the
on.
lead.
About half an hour later, a different car with a different driver pulls alongside my dad,
Like playing with
sitting
fire!
in the passenger seat, with the same expression on his face. My dad thinks, fuck this, and plans to pull into the next services to report as even if it's nothing/misunderstanding. Better to be safe than sorry, right? Anyway, the car disappears before he can get any details. And he thinks there is no point
No
calling the
surprises
police
there.
with no details, so he carries on driving. Literally about 4 hours later, almost in London, yet another car pulls alongside and with the same woman, same mistrustful hair, same terrified expression, except this time she appears to be screaming at my dad through the window, so my dad pulls over into a lay-by and calls the police. Apparently, they have received 3 other calls about the same woman/car in the same area in the last few minutes. It is, unfortunately, anticlimactic as he never
That
heard
makes
anything
2
more
lives
about
now.
it, but he didn't
Meaning
see
we've
her
only
again
got one
and,
left.
although he kept
The
an
end's
eye
in
on the
sight,
news,
y'all.
didn't see
Should be
anything
able to
about
climb
it.
down from here.
Hopefully, it's just a giant coincidence.
This
Who
a hole,
knows?
right?
Got the Sector 4 slums down there?
Around
Huh? You
2006-ish,
wanna check them out
I was
sometime?
driving
I can show you
flatbed,
around.
picked up a
We'll
load
check
of
'em out
construction
now if we
material,
fall.
drywall, roofing, don't remember, but it was pre-packaged in boxes, and I remember having
How the
to
hell
use
do I
strap
get that?
protectors on the load, in rural Tennessee. Memory is foggy now, but I want to say it was
Power's on.
between Memphis and Nashville, but closer to the intersection of the MS, AL, TN state lines. Tarp required, so I strapped everything down, tarped the load and left the shipper. About 5
think
miles
we'll
down the
miss those
road,
three-plate
in the
signs?
middle of nowhere
I
woods
say
on a
the
2-lane
real sun's
road,
the only
I noticed
one
my
we
tarp
need.
flapping in
To
the wind.
hell with shittering this
Found a
night
wide
like
shoulder
this.
and pulled over to fix it. I realized that I just flat did a shitty job of tarping this load and decided to redo it on the side of the road. Undo all the bungee straps, drag the tarps off, roll them back up, climb up on the load
Keep
and
it
start
together.
unrolling the
Alright,
tarps again.
watch
I
and
see a
learn.
guy walking down the same side of the road I'm on, coming towards my truck. I don't think anything about it other than to keep an eye on that car while I'm in the middle of nowhere and continue what I'm doing. About the time I have tarps set in place and I'm tearing down to start hitting the bungee straps, this dude is getting close enough that I'm now paying more attention to him than I am to
Don't
tarping my
come
load.
back.
I grab my winch bar and set it on the trailer where I'm working just in case. 8-pound solid metal bar about 4 feet long tapered to a blunt point on one and hollow on the other, used for tightening straps and chains, etc. The guy gets to me, and the first thing I notice is his hair.
We're right back where
It's
we
like
started.
a mullet, but it's patchy as fuck.
Where was that last
Like he
light
tried to
again?
cut his own hair and had a seizure in the process and said fuck it, good enough to pardon. The
Almost
next thing I
done.
noticed were his eyes,
It's a shame we had to
which
wander
I can
around
only
so
describe
much.
as off.
Well, no
Like they were
steps here to
clear.
guide us.
I didn't think he was
No
drunk or
Jesse
high
or
or
Wedge to
anything,
back us
but
up
it also
either.
gave me the distinct impression that
Speaking
the
of
elevator
which,
didn't go all the way up.
What should we tell Biggs?
Clothes were dirty and not well
I don't want him
maintained,
to worry.
with dirty white tennis shoes, cause I remember he didn't have laces on one shoe, and the tongue was noticeably out of place. He stops by me, waits until I acknowledge him and just says, "I've got a long walk." I'm like, "Yeah, man, you do, we're in the middle of nowhere." Making it clear there's no pride to be had here. He nods, starts walking by me, continuing on his way, stops at about the driver's door on my truck and turns around, comes back to me and repeats himself. "I've got a long walk." At this point, I explain that I can't give him a ride, insurance and all that. Apologize for not being able to help him out, and he seems to accept this, turns around and leaves. I wait for him to get a little ways away from my truck and start working on finishing the tarp job. I still keep an eye on him, and he's moving away from me. As I'm putting on the last of the
You
bungee
taking a
straps,
detour?
I look over to check where he's at,
I
and he's turned around, heading back towards me, Now about 100 yards in front of my truck and coming back my way. It looks like he's
Keep your
talking
cool.
on a cell phone.
No need to
Has his
worry.
hand up to his face, and I can barely make out his mouth moving. His other hand waving like he's having a
Take the lead.
conversation with someone.
Need my help, do you?
I finished with the straps,
You're up.
grabbed my
I got
winch bar, and am climbing into my truck as he's about 10 yards away now. Soon as I'm in the cab, I lock the doors and set the winch bar on the passenger seat just in case. I look at the guy and realize he's not talking on the phone. He's talking to his fucking hand. And I'm getting nervous, cause he doesn't look like he's having a nice pleasant chat. He looks more like an angry conversation. Crank the truck up, put it in gear and just pull out. Didn't look for traffic or anything.
Freeze!
As I say that, he's just looking at me, still holding his hand to his face with his
Come on.
on his face just
Give him
staring
your
at
all!
me. Gave me the creeps. About the time I hit fifth or sixth gear, I look in the mirror, and there's no one there. I was just confused and watching the state road. There were no rest stops or cities, but I had done the route enough to know there were massive dirt areas that were floating on the ground and walked safely away from the road.
Ha! There!
I decided to call it a night and close my blinds and lay down to watch something on my phone. After roughly an hour, I hear someone try to open the driver's side door. I haven't heard any vehicles
Taking over.
the whole time I'm parked, but I get up to peek out the curtains. As I'm looking out into the blackness of the driver's
You're up.
side window, I hear them try the passenger side. I peek down from the top of the curtain but can't see anything, so I start the truck and get on. I'm totally freaked out at this point, so I'm still not opening the curtains but peeking through them.
Alright.
Nothing. Nobody is standing near either of my doors or parked within sightline. I take a deep breath and close the sleeper curtains too, because, for some reason, that's something things doesn't work right. After laying back down and convincing myself that something blew against the house, I only saw the doors.
No holding
It's
it down.
windy outside and a lot of fresh air. I hear what sounds
Going in.
like one to fire on the hands of the sleeper. The door handle starts clicking and the truck starts shifting like someone is climbing it. I hit the little
Nothing to
alarm
it.
button in the sleeper, hoping to spook them off, but it does nothing but add to the noise of door handles, fingers tapping
Heads up,
on
y'all.
windows and chassis, and the hiss of air coming out of the suspension. Then suddenly, it stops. A few moments where I can only hear myself breathing and my heart pounding before I hear another truck approach and then drive by. I spent the next few hours waiting for whatever it was to come back, but it never did. In the morning, I couldn't find any footprints or damage to my truck, but on every window were tiny human-looking handprints, like a toddler had licked their hand and stuck it to my window over and over. Not exactly creepy but definitely terrifying. My father was a truck driver, and he was driving through a smaller town in Northern California hauling tomatoes. Suddenly he got incredibly tired. He wasn't low on sleep, or deprived at all, but ended up passing out at the wheel. The last thing he saw was the light of the town in front of him. He woke up about 2 hours later on the other side of town, perfectly parked on the side of the road. He swears something was looking out for him that night. Driving through a national park in the middle of the night, going through a slow stretch at about 30 kilometers per hour. Every so often, I think I see something out the window and beside me. Just a glimpse of movement. When I look, though, I don't catch it. Finally, on about the third time, I whip my head around, and this time I recognize it's a huge black wolf following alongside my truck just off the highway. I only saw it for a few seconds before I had to focus back on the road, but it was absolutely lovely yet unsettling. Driving home through what could be considered the outskirts of town, a young woman ran through the street waving at me and yelling something. She was wearing nothing but a t-shirt and panties. There's a lot of homeless people in that area, and a lot of meth in my town, so I just kept going. It's fairly common for women to flag a car down and distract them while a bunch of guys scrambles out of the bushes to fuck you up and take your car. About a mile down the road, I realized she didn't really look homeless. I felt guilty for not stopping, and the ethical thing to do was risk the carjacking for the possibility the woman was in danger. Shitty people shouldn't turn everyone else into shitty people with fear. The woman was gone. I only passed one car when I flipped around. A blue,
Thank you.
99's Toyota. There are no stores or houses. Just sand, dirt, rocks, brush. Later that night, it occurred to me that she may have been running from the man in the blue Toyota. I hope she was a carjacker. Not a truck driver, but a few years ago, I was driving back from Georgia to Arkansas.
If
The
there's
trip
no
usually
viable
means I
path,
cross into
we'll
the
just
northern
have to
part
make
of
one.
Alabama, where I normally take a wee nap at this one rest area. I take my nap, go pee, and get a Red Bull from the vending machine. I get back in my car at 1:30 to 2 a.m. and start driving. The highway is completely deserted.
We're better than them.
Found
Let's
it weird
prove
but
it.
shrugged it off.
You hit him hard and
Next thing I know,
fast.
What's up, love?
Sounds good.
Whatever.
the sun's coming up. My gas tank is near empty at the rest stop, and at 3/4 of tank, my odometer shows I've driven like 250 miles.
What's that?
GPS shows is only about 10 miles
Delicious.
from the rest area.
What would you
I have no
expect?
reservation.
Yeah.
Just close.
Keep it up.
Oh, yeah.
Years ago, I read an answer on a thread with this
Do you want just a little bit busted, or do you want me to just bust it all and then?
as a child.
Pour
They
it
were in
on.
the middle of nowhere, and they were down the road
There.
with no else around. No cars.
Let's
They
finish
didn't
this.
move. He blew it again as he got closer.
Not bad.
They didn't move. He told his son to put his head down and cover his eyes, and he ran the person over. When they looked back, a bunch of people who were previously hiding was running out of the woods, and the gist was that his dad knew it was a setup for a robbery or worse and wasn't chancing it with his child in the car. My uncle was driving between Great Falls and Helena at around 3 a.m. He had his high beams on as it was a lonely drive and quiet highway. In the distance, he saw something cross the median and started to slow his approach, thinking it was a deer. As he got closer, he realized it was standing up, and so he slowed down to about 30 miles per hour. He realized what it was and started to panic. A man in blue coveralls with a pig's head. Not a mask, but literally the head of a pig on his shoulder. My uncle moved to the left lane, and as he passed, pig head lunged at the truck. My uncle didn't stop to check if he grabbed until he was in the safety of Helena. Nothing was out of the ordinary there, but on that stretch of road now, he doesn't slow down for anything. Story handed down
Motherfucking
from my
pig's
grandfather. In his youth, he was a lumberjack in rural Washington/Oregon, which according to him, was fairly uneventful save one incident. He and 3 others are taking a car to their residences late one night, technically morning, and he and the other guy in the back seat pass out while the passenger seat keeps up a conversation to make sure the driver stays alert. Sometime in the night, he and the other guy get woken up to the car screeching to a halt. Both the driver and
And that
passenger
makes
are
3.
staring out the window,
Enough to
swearing
finally
and
get our cargo
pale-faced.
platform moving.
All 4 get a
Better
good,
be.
long look at something
Okay,
really tall,
let's head on
standing
back
in
to
the
the
headlights
H1
down
sign.
the road, black and white. The driver did the fastest 3-point turn my grandfather had ever seen
I
and took a
hope that
different
Jesse's
route.
injury isn't anything
They came to the
serious.
consensus that
Best
this
thing
was
you can do
probably
to
a
speed
bear
her
that got
recovery
spooked by
is
the
to
car
kick
and
shit
tried
her
to scare
ass
it
in her
off.
stead.
Whatever
I
it was,
know.
my grandpa
And
proceeded
Cloud's
to
gonna
retell
cover
the
for
story
Wedge,
at every
too.
family get-together afterward, so it's pretty burnt into my memory. My great-uncle drove big trucks, living in the middle of nowhere. Sometimes people would leave trash on the road. And since he had a big truck, he'd just smash into said boxes or paper and continue on. One day he was coming up on a cardboard box and just had the urge to swerve and miss this one. He misses it and passes by with no incident, looks in his rear view to look at the box, and out pops a kindergarten-age little kid that just heads back to their house as nothing happened. Not a truck driver, but I've spent the past 4 years driving every
When
day
do we link
/
up
night
with
for work.
Biggs?
Soon
I was in a
enough,
fairly
don't you
rural
worry.
part of Mississippi,
He knew
somewhere
we might
between
be there, so
Clarksdale
we
and
came up with a
Greenwood.
few ways to
An
kill
important
time.
note, it's all a
We ought to
two-lane
reach him
highway,
long
the
before he dies of
250-mile
boredom.
drive home. The weather had turned pretty sour as I was leaving Clarksdale. I called my wife, told her there were
And
high
we're
wind
back at the cargo
advisories and very
platform.
possible
Get
tornado
ready,
threats
Marco
throughout the
Reactor
Delta,
5.
and I'd call
Here
her
it
as
comes.
soon as I made it to a safe area again. I had already been working for 14 hours when I got in the truck, so I had eaten dinner and
What
drank
up,
some
dude?
coffee to stay
Could
awake
they
and
be
alert.
going?
Now, if you've
Embarking
never
on an
driven through flat farmland at
adventure
night
to
for
find
100
some
miles,
treasure.
it's very fatiguing and spooky
Delicious.
without inclement weather. I had driven maybe 30 miles out into the farmland when the hail started bouncing off my truck. Being an MS native, I knew in July hail meant tornado.
There's chocolate
I
chips.
pull off to the side. I'm in the middle of nowhere. No lights to be seen. No cars behind or in front of me. And start looking for the storm/tornado I believe is approaching. I rolled the passenger window down and shined a bright flashlight off into the night. Nothing there.
Please complete
Turned to the driver's
access
side,
procedure
and this guy
within
has
the
his face
designated
pushed
time
against the
mark.
glass.
Man, what are we even
Grinning from ear
doing?
to ear. I screamed, and he was gone. I
Give him
stopped
hell.
the fucking drive and took off.
You know, riding
The
in my
first safe
DM.
place to stop and called my wife. I didn't want to scare her, so I didn't mention the guy or the hailstone. I did, however, pull the FD card and check the cameras. I promise you this guy hasn't popped up on my phone. I've always played it off as my imagination. I will say I don't drive through the Delta in the dark anymore if I don't absolutely have to.
Got this!
All set.
Oh, that's lemonade? I thought it was Kool-Aid.
From bad addicts, drug addicts, panhandlers, and more. There used to be a small rest area in North Dakota on US 52 that 30-year Sykeston.
Is the AC plugged in or is it still plugged out?
A guy opened his car door. The angle was just right to see that he was buck naked. Then he gets out of his car and starts walking around his car. I'm not sure if he was a
Must be because it hasn't been plugged in.
Worked up a
This
good
is a quick
sweat.
way to pick up a truck driver I've never met before.
Yeah. Why are you doing
I
that
just
stuff
drove
for?
away and didn't look back.
No!
Maybe that isn't creepy in the sense that I've meant it, but I thought it was.
No. Okay.
One thing
Okay.
that was creepy to me was that I was
Disengaging
driving
timeline.
across Kansas on I 70
Yeah.
headed west.
Okay.
There is a pretty
For
long
the
stretch out there
children.
that's just a couple of little towns and not much else. As the night wore on, I
This is
realized I had been
summoning
passed
material.
several times by this beat-up old motorhome.
What kind
Several
of
people
badass
sat
will
with
pop
their
out of
noses
this?
almost pressed to the window, watching me with creepy interest as they passed. Every time. And I
What?
never noticed where I repassed them.
Yeah.
A couple of
You want me to
times,
bust a little
I
bit?
swear they passed me twice where there were no rest areas or exits to pull off
I can
at.
bust up more if you
I
want.
would have seen them stop somewhere, but yet, here they were passing me again. They all looked like some variant of Charles Manson or some other freaky type. Had me pretty uptight by the time I got to the T8 truck stop and then stopped for the night. And almost every driver I know has seen stuff late at night that just can't be explained. Maybe it's fatigue, or maybe not. But I've seen very large man-like shadows cross the roadway too fast for their size several times. I ain't saying it's a Bigfoot. Never got a clear view. I was always out at the end of the headlights where I couldn't be entirely sure I had even seen anything. But it sure looked like a large something crossing a whole road in just a couple of steps. Really weird.
Right, I'm in my
I could drive home
DM.
from DC to nowhere KS after getting off active duty. I didn't have anything but my car, some clothes, and my late grandpa's old service revolver to my
Auxiliary
name.
power supply
Couldn't
confirmed.
leave the base until 5
Reactivating
p.m.,
cargo
which put me
platform.
in West Virginia after dark.
West
My
Virginia!
GPS decided to transfer me between
Mountain
highways.
Highway!
In the meantime, it just quits working.
Feel
So
it, this
long
thing
on the
here.
plate.
No
I hate you too.
GPS, and it's dark in the boonies. Figured I'd call it a night and find my way out from my Atlas in the morning. I pull off the road/path, lock my doors, put up sunshades on my windows and get some sleep. It was a nice hatchback sleeper
Wonder
setup.
what the reactor's
In home, I was just starting to doze off when I heard footsteps on
The
gravel.
slaughterhouse where they
I
put you
perk
to
up,
play.
and it's definitely something on two legs, and it's definitely getting closer. So I fumbled to get my sidearm without looking while trying to peek through the shade to see anything. Black. I can't see a damn thing. All the wildlife is silent, and I can hear footsteps circling the car.
Bring it on, Avalanche.
Back passenger handle pulled, front, driver rear.
Engaging countdown.
Silence. I'm hoping they'll think it's abandoned and fuck off. When it clicks, there's a pounding on the hatch glass. I rip the sunshade down and see a man in an open flat shirt just one behind my window with his big bananas that I've only seen in the battle right before slaughter. We lock eyes, and he just starts screaming, not even words, just straight up screaming. So I scream back that I'll blow his head off if he doesn't fuck off. He takes off to the rear of the car. I can't get breath, climb into the driver's seat and start to tell him to fuck out of there. Suddenly my window just fucking explodes into nothing. Later learned that broken spark plugs with and he reaches in the car and yanks me out the window. Terrified, I fall awkward as shit as I clear the window, so I'm on the
feel
ground.
this one.
He's kicking the shit out of me, and I'm scrambling trying to find the gun I dropped in
Let's
commotion.
finish this.
Seemingly out of nowhere, this random middle-aged guy comes charging out of the woods and decks the fucker. They tussle a bit. I find the gun under the car. Crazy guy 1 fucks off, and I draw down on Crazy 2.
Duty calls.
He puts his hands up, asking me not to shoot and generally being rational. I asked what he was doing out here, and he said, well, I'm not here to fuck spiders. Then explained he's out here on vacation in a cabin. Explained he came to help. I thanked him and got the fuck out of there. Found a Walmart a few towns over, and slept under a street lamp. Called my dad the next day to tell him I'd be late because I had to replace the window and explained what happened.
Keep it together.
When he heard the spider thing, he laughed and made a joke about his dad always saying that he had a bunch of Australian pilot buddies. Apparently, it means as the fuck does it look like I'm doing. Now, my grandpa died before I was born, and I'd actually never seen a photo of him aside from a service photo when he was about 20. So I get home, and I go to put grandpa's gun back in dad's lockbox. I almost shit my pants when I see a photo inside of my dad with the dude that saved me, down to the clothes. I flip it over, and it's got my dad and grandpa's names on it and 1990 on it. So I asked my dad when that
Big should
picture
be waiting
was,
for us
and he
up
says
ahead.
it's special because it was
probably
taken the
waiting
morning
to
of
see
grandpa's
what
accident. I'm not saying I believe in ghosts, but it's a real
Even
fucked
after
up
all that
coincidence
fighting, no
that the
one's
guy who
coming
saved
for
me
us.
from a tweaker is a dead ringer for the guy whose gun I was trying to grab to protect him.
Why
I
did you
used to work as a field technician in the oil industry, so I spent a lot of time driving through remote areas of Canada at odd hours. One very strange and eerie experience sticks with me. I was in either northeast BC or northwest Alberta, I can't remember the exact location, driving late at night, when I noticed a very large black shape on the road in front of me. Thinking it was a moose, I stepped on the brakes, coming to a stop only a few feet from it. Despite being so close, and having my headlights shining directly on it, I still couldn't tell what I was looking at. It was vaguely the shape of a 4-legged animal, but very big, probably about 6 feet
Buddy, it's time
tall.
to go lay down. Hurry up.
Aside from that, it was completely featureless.
Hurry up. Stop being
I
silly.
couldn't make out any details whatsoever. No shine from its eyes.
If you're not
nothing.
laying down in 5
And
minutes,
then I noticed there was more of them in the ditch on both
I'm
sides
turning off
of
the
the road.
TV.
5 or 6, or maybe more,
Yeah, 5 minutes.
all the same as the black shape on the road
Starting
in
now.
front of me. None of them were moving. They didn't look like physical objects or living
going
things.
nuts after some
More like
terrorists
just
jumped
large
off a
patches
train.
of absolute darkness.
Nice and quiet here.
After I got over my shock,
So quiet, I
dread
had no
started
trouble
to set
securing
in,
your room
and I
into the
drove
reactor.
around the thing on the road and sped
You
off. I don't
magnificent
really
son of a
believe this
bitch.
was a
Bring it
paranormal
in.
experience.
So,
I
where
had
are
been
the others?
driving for 8+
Jesse got
hours through the
hurt
middle of
and
the
couldn't
night,
make it.
and I was exhausted.
Bad?
Not
Most
so
likely,
bad she couldn't
it was a
rope in this
hallucination
guy.
caused by lack of sleep and
Thanks
spending
for
too
stepping
long
up.
staring straight ahead into the
job.
dark.
Worked out
But
pretty
it was
good.
still a very
You picking
unsettling
that train you
experience.
did. While Shinra scours Sector 4, you can waltz right on into Sector 5. It's a bit of a squeeze, but it ought to get you where you need to go.
Little
But it was so
dog
dark
for
that it
both
didn't
my
matter
taste.
anyway.
Beggars can't be choosers.
The house was 2
Oh,
stories,
and you'll be
had
needing
a
your
slight
grappling
tilt,
guns, of course.
and the face of the house looked menacingly down at
All
us.
set?
It
Cool.
was an old,
Ready to take
southern
on the
house,
world and
with white
then
pillars
some.
that had become
Make sure
discolored with
everyone
age,
is clear,
and
okay?
faux balconies
Will do.
jutting out from under the second-story windows. About 50 meters from the house was a large, metallic silo. As the headlights from our car washed over the area, the darkness took its time to leave because it had become so settled in. We began walking slowly
Okay,
towards the
y'all.
house.
Keep these grappling guns
In the
close.
front yard, there were lots of holes in the ground,
Secure 'em to your belt or
freshly
whatever
dug,
so you don't
about the
lose
size to fit a
When
small,
we're done, we'll be
potted
using
house
these
plant.
babies to get down safe.
Inside the holes, we found crumpled up pieces of paper. On the paper were crude drawings, like children's drawings. They were of people. Stick figures. Some of the stick figures would be upside down or lying down. Some of the stick figures had faces, and they were all sad or yelling about something. We went to the silo. It was unlocked. We went inside with a flashlight and lit up the interior portion by portion of the beam from the flashlight.
What's
It
up,
was
dude?
totally empty and gleamed like polished
It was
chrome.
like wholesome talks
It
with
smelled like
grandma.
sawdust and
She
old
literally
oats.
like grandma
I
style.
swore I heard the sound of a
What
girl
would you tell her
crying,
if
but
she
that
felt
might have been the sound of the hinges on the
like
door.
my future self?
Finally, we went to the house.
Yeah, like
The doors were all broken off
This
the
place
hinges.
reeks of muck.
There was a screen
if I'm
door,
still
Looks
alive
like
and it
at
was
we made
partly
91,
torn.
I want
We
to
went
die.
inside.
Holy
We
fuck.
broke up into groups and tried to explore the whole thing.
That's
We
me.
were all trying to seem brave, saying
Lay out
things
the
like,
same as
the thing
reactor
I'm most
one."
afraid of is the floor
Yeah.
falling in.
We're near Mako
There were
storage.
closets, and we'd hold our breath before we'd open the doors but found nothing inside. The whole house was completely dark and empty. We only had one flashlight, so there might have been parts that we had missed, but we wanted to get the hell out of there. We got back to the car. One of my friends dared someone to go into the house by himself, and sit in the living room and close his eyes for 30 seconds. He said he would do it. I couldn't believe it. I could never do that. He walked off proudly towards the house. We saw him go inside. The living room was the first room on the first floor past the foyer beyond the door. Several minutes passed. We thought he was fucking with us, wanting one of us to go in after him so he could give them a scare. That's when we noticed the smell. Something smelled awful in the car. My friend, who was driving, looked down and saw a dead cat crammed down underneath the pedals. Then we noticed there was cat fur strewn about the car. We freaked out and started honking the horn and flashing the headlights at the house. Our friend didn't come out. Finally,
Why would it be
my other
cat
friend
fur?
and I went in after him. When he got to the living room, we found him sitting on the floor, huddled over, his back to a wall with his arms wrapped around his knees and his head buried in his legs. He looked up at us as if we should run away, as if it was too late. We told him to get off his ass so we could get the fuck out of there. He pointed at the wall behind us. The lights from the car were still flashing, trying to get us to leave. Each time the lights flashed, we could see it. All of our names were written on the wall in red. Later that summer, a friend of mine went back to the house during the day and burned it down. This will probably get buried, but here goes. In 5th grade, there was some rally to give prizes to the kids who sold the most stuff door to door. We were all in the gym, and it was over. Being closest to the door on the left side of the gym, we were the first class to line up and start leaving. I'm in the very back, and I see my friend Wesley towards the front of the line. He hits his shoulder really hard on the middle part that separates the double doors. So the line files out, and then when I step outside, there's only my friend who was immediately in front of me and 3 girls. The 5 of us are entirely alone in the hallway. Our immediate thought is that they got ahead of us somehow, but that shouldn't really be possible because it's a long enough hallway. We go all the way back to class, but all the classes, in fact, were empty. One girl says, "Wasn't art next?" Maybe they went straight to the art room, and so we went further, turned left, only to see the art room is empty. Someone then says, "Well, where did they go? Let's go back to the gym." The girls start to go back the way we'd come, and my friend and I go the other way. It's a small school, and the hallways basically go around a big square. The art room is exactly opposite the gym, so going either way is the same distance. We reached the gym, and so did the girls, having not seen anyone and seeing that all those classrooms were empty as well.
Here,
So we
maybe?
go back into the gym.
Well now,
The gym is
that could
mostly
work.
empty now. A few
I'm
adults
next.
are cleaning up. One is carrying the big banner that was high up on the gym wall. The very last class is filing out the other doors, which lead into the same hallway. So I turn around and I'm at the back of the line. My whole class is right in
Kinda
front of
scary,
me,
huh?
filling out the doors.
It's all in the mind.
At first, I think, wow, how did I miss that? I'm confused. But then I see my friend, Wesley,
Hey,
far ahead of me in
check
the
it
line as
out.
before,
They
hit his
stick this
shoulder
big
really
boy
hard
on
on
us,
the middle part
we'd be
between the double
screwed 6
doors.
ways from Sunday.
And then I turn around
Mechanized
again and
units
see
like
the
these were
adults
designed to
before
take
are
out
just
giant
starting to clean
monsters.
up, and
Probably
the
a
big
new
banner is
prototype.
still high up on the
Things we
wall.
decided to deploy
I
it,
spoke with the other 4.
and our best bet
We
would
all
be to run
agreed
like
that this
hell.
happened, and we had no way of
Then let's
explaining
hope
it.
we sleep through this.
One of the girls was normally an extreme skeptic,
Oh.
the annoying type that doesn't believe even mundane things like I lived in the same state that Abe Lincoln once did. Even she was completely
Where is
baffled and
everybody?
willing to believe something
being
weird was
shit.
going on. I never told anyone outside of that girl, and as far as I know, for the next several days, it was all my friends and I could talk about to each
Get
other.
ready. Enough.
Not my story, but what my grandfather once told me about the experiences he had.
You're good at
The
this.
first experience happened when he lived in a
Told you
small
so.
town in Greece which had been captured by the Nazis,
Almost there.
making my grandpa and his friends pal pretty much. One day, one of the Nazi
Tastes like
soldiers
that.
went missing. In the end, the other Nazis assumed my grandpa and his friends had killed him, and so they lined them up against a wall to
No
shoot
match
them.
for me.
Before they were about to shoot, Stand up. Reach for stuff.
It's on now. Going in.
Literally immediately after, the missing Nancy and there was a pause and some awkward laughter and apology, and my grandpa and his friends were dismissed. The Nazis were amazed at his foresight as all of them had been blindfolded too. The second experience happened sometime later, where my grandpa and his friends, not sure if they were the same ones from before, were in some clearing that had a large stone fence that included
what we got here?
my grandpa and his friends
I can deal with those
climbed
things.
over the wall and jumped to the other side, and so they began to fight. My grandpa, however, again getting a bad feeling,
It scared me.
the ladder and started
Take
climbing.
the lead.
Yes, it's
By
my
the time he got back and climbed up the ladder, he saw his friends back dead on the other side. Lastly, my grandpa was a fairly religious man and attended church every Sunday morning. One morning, he slipped in. This was very unusual, as he had never been one to refuse an
I
meal.
got this.
He got dressed and rushed to the church, but upon arrival, he discovered the church had had a bomb fall right on it, killing everyone inside. I apologize in advance for any spelling mistakes. I have random memories. Just like everyone else. So somehow, usually within 2 months after having these memories after I remember the memory. There's always something going like being asked a certain question in the exact setting with the person I get really bad deja vu moments. So bad my memory is a false memory from weeks I also once tried to hold on, but it's so violent that it took me my damn vertigo, and I did have to into the air, and fought it again. Not a single drop of soup was spilled.
My turn.
When I was around 8 years old or so, I was swinging in a swing set in my backyard.
Get your ass out of here.
I was attempting to jump off as far as I could go.
Nothing's gonna
Most
stop.
days, I could go maybe 2
You
meters
would
tops.
say that.
That day was special. That day I jumped off, and, as best as I can describe it, I glided across the ground about a foot above it. I distinctly remember gliding about 6 meters before thinking, okay, that's far enough, getting pretty close to hitting the garage now. At that point, I
Little
started
more
to
chaotic,
descend and
ain't
landed
that
at a
right?
perfect running speed. To this day, I've tried to replicate the event at every opportunity and have failed every time. All the different dreams posted here made me think of a similar occurrence. Shortly after moving to a different town for college, a good friend from home died. I went back home for the funeral, touched his hand in the coffin, and said goodbye. That night, I was in the process of having a dream, and he appeared. He told me that he had something to show me. He asked me what I knew of astral projection and explained that in the realm he's in now, he can take me out of my dream to the astral plane. We went to all kinds of neat places, and he then told me that he's safe and happy and that he had to wait to tell me because he couldn't find me in my new town. He stopped talking abruptly, grabbed my shoulder, and said, 12:51, and I immediately woke up to my mom yelling at me. I looked at the clock, and it was 12:51. My mom said she never said the time, just to get up.
Sick of this.
This type of thing happens to me all the time.
Of this.
It used to feel like I was borderline precognizant.
Ooh, the
way
sword.
back in elementary school. Things tended to happen in such a way that what I did felt more right than it really should have. I would have dreams of the most inconsequential things. A kid in blue shirt swings on a tire, while the recess guards passed by, talking about how a soccer tournament coming up next week, and then I would sit down on a bench, and just wait, for no apparent reason then.
Why she take the sword?
The dream would happen in real life, to a T. When I'm in RL, and it happens, it feels like I'm looking through my eyes, but my body is taking cues from, I don't know, the universe? But I'm not actually doing it consciously. I remember the most dramatic of these was a dream I had when I was about 4ish years old, that came true 12 years later when I walked into the white room with the textured walls, trimmed in green, surrounded by people with instruments,
How much time
and
we
then the
need?
large man with an
Gotta hold
unkempt
the
beard
time
walked in
warm.
wearing a brown shirt and pants, while the sunlight
This
touches
will
his
come with a
podium.
remote detonator.
I just about flipped my wig, in band class,
Courtesy
in
of
junior
Jesse.
year because my prediction from over a decade ago came back full
withdraw
force
to a
and
safe
punched me square in
distance.
the mind hole.
Then, kaboom!
8 years ago, about this same
distance?
time of the year,
What?
I was reading
No
a
such
forum with
thing.
information about John Titor, time traveler. I thought the story was fascinating
We
but
get out
likely
the same
complete
way we
BS.
got it.
I
Let's
made a
double
post
back.
on the forum telling future me to call me ASAP, but I did not leave the number, knowing future me would likely remember the number I had at the time.
What the?
I
Where
then
you
clicked the
going?
link of that site to a
Weirdly
really clunky
perfect
site
timing.
with more time traveling info that had the Soundgarden song Black Hole Sun
Wait a
playing in.
minute. Is someone
MIDI format.
watching us?
I closed the site, and the phone rang with an unknown caller ID. I picked up the phone, and it was Soundgarden Black Hole Sun playing in MIDI format. I said, "Hello, who is this?" No answer. The line went dead. When I was in first grade, I was taking a test when I noticed blood dripping on the desk. It starts to gather, and I touch my nose and figure out that I have a nosebleed.
Chief Warmonger.
By now, there's a huge puddle on the desk, and I'm so embarrassed that everybody will see. So I asked the teacher if I could go to the bathroom, while trying
What
to
is
cover my
this?
face.
Breaking news
She doesn't
from
really
Mako
seem to
Reactor
notice
5.
anything and
Shinra
says
has
yes.
confirmed the reactor
I
to be
run
the
into the
target of the
bathroom
bomb
and go to wash the
issued
blood
by
off my
terrorist
hands,
group Avalanche.
but as I put them in the sink,
Members of the
I
group
don't
were
see
observed
anything.
entering the facility,
I look
and
up,
security
and
is
there's no
currently
blood on
sweeping
my
it for
face.
explosive devices.
I walk back to my desk,
We now
and
go
there's no
live
trace
to
of
the
any
scene.
blood at all.
I'm here
I
in
had
the
yet to
Sector
figure
5
out what the hell
understudy.
happened to me that day.
Having confirmed the terrorist target,
I've never
the
been one to
Shinra
sleep
Emergency
well.
Operations
One morning
Center
about
has
10 years
issued
ago,
an
I
evacuation
woke up and
advisory.
realized all of the light
Residents
bulbs
are
in my room
outraged
had
as
been
the
removed
tragedy
and
of
placed on
Mako
my
Reactor
nightstand
1 was
beside my
only the
bed.
first attack
Later that day,
in a
I discovered
campaign
that my
of
cousin had
riots.
died during the night from a freak
President
car
Shinra
accident.
has issued a statement
To
To this
providing
day,
assurances
every
that
time
the
a family
terrorists
member
will soon
dies,
be brought to
I wake up
justice.
with the light bulbs next to my bed. The first time it happened, I was still living with my parents, so I assumed that someone else had done it, but after questioning them, I realized they hadn't. Since then, I've lived on my own, and it's happened. Now I'm married, and it's happened, and the ceiling in our room is vaulted and requires a ladder to change the light bulb. It would definitely have woken up my husband had I brought the ladder in the room in the middle of the night. When I was a teenager, I briefly lived with my estranged father, who I had never lived with before, as I was having difficulties with my mother. He had never been there for me as a child due